2025 Poudre School District Knowledge Bowl Championship. Tonight we have teams representing Fort Collins High School, Fossil Ridge High School, Rocky Mountain High School, and for the first time, Timnath Middle High School. My name is Craig Rhodes, and I will be your MC for this evening. Tonight's judges are experts in a variety of content areas for Poudre School District. Laura Grissom is the PSD Curriculum Facilitator for Science. Scott Van Tattenhove is the PSD Curriculum Facilitator for Social Studies. Kelly Shank is the PSD Curriculum Facilitator for Mathematics. And Amanda Krieger is the Director of Curriculum and Instruction. The four people up front tonight are very important: Beth Knies, Emily Vangermersch, Brian Dyson, and Kaylee Bear will be running the buzzer system and timing each question. The five of us will work together throughout the competition. They will tell me which team has buzzed in, stop me if needed before I jump into the next question, etc. And finally, Melinda Sirachi, the scorekeeper. Please give all our curriculum department district staff a round of applause for helping tonight. The coaches for each team are Ryan Bishop with Fort Collins High School, Brian Riedel with Fossil Ridge High School, Ben Johnson with Rocky Mountain High School, Emily Pipkin with Timnath Middle High School. The team who wins tonight's championship will host the Traveling Knowledge Bowl trophy at their site until next year's event. At this point, we are going to have each team member introduce themselves by telling their name and grade, starting down the line.
Hi, I'm Lincoln, and I'm a 9th grader at Timnath.
I'm Sarah, and I'm a 10th grader at Timnath.
I'm Zarek, and I'm a 10th grader at Timnath.
I'm Zoe, and I'm a 10th grader at Timnath.
I'm Lorenzo, I'm a senior at Rocky.
I'm Chet, I'm also a senior at Rocky.
I'm Tyson, I'm also a senior at Rocky.
I'm Kaya, I'm a freshman at Rocky.
I'm Noah, I'm a junior at Collins.
I'm Nick, I'm a senior at Collins.
I'm Theo, I am a junior at Fort Collins.
I'm Finn, I'm a junior at Collins.
I'm Reagan, and I am a junior at Fossil.
I'm Grayson, and I'm a senior at Fossil.
I'm Vaish, and I'm a junior at Fossil.
I'm Ben, I'm a junior at Fossil.
Thank you all for being here. Substitutions can be made after 15 questions have been asked each round. Play will pause for a minute or two at question 15 to allow teams and coaches to discuss and implement substitutions. Before I move on to number 16, I will announce the current score for the TV audience and ask the subs to introduce themselves. We will take a quick break between each of the 4 rounds to refresh scratch paper, and during these end-of-round switchovers, team may substitute competitors if they like. We will take a longer bathroom break between rounds 2 and 3, and let's get started. Good luck, everyone. All right, round 1, question 1. Political roles. What evocative term is used for a member of a political party whose task is to ensure party discipline in a legislature?
Party whip?
That is correct. Question 2. It's all downhill from here. Completed in 1825, what artificial waterway of upstate New York connects the Great Lakes to the Hudson River, allows shipping to the Atlantic? Should we?
That's fine. Do a different question. It's fine. It's fine.
All right. Alternative question 1. Don't say it. Which Shakespeare play is considered unlucky?
Macbeth.
That is correct. Question 3. Pencil and paper. Temperature problems. Water was heated to 150 degrees Fahrenheit, then allowed to cool at a rate of 6 degrees per minute. After how many minutes will the water be at 72 degrees Fahrenheit?
13 minutes.
That is correct. Question 4. Quick reads. Considered to be the middle ground between a short story and a novel, what term is used to describe?
Novella.
That is correct. Question 5. Cold War confrontations. The United States and the Soviet Union came closest to nuclear conflict.
Cuban Missile Crisis.
That is incorrect.
President Kennedy.
That is incorrect.
1983 missile, misunderstanding.
That is incorrect. In 1962, over the installation of Soviet missiles in what country?
Cuba.
That is correct. Question 6. Using plants for what? What is the name of the process in which plants, such as sunflowers or Indian mustard,
Photosynthesis.
that is incorrect, are used to remove pollutants from contaminated soil and water?
Leaching?
That is incorrect. What is the name of the process where plants such as sunflowers or Indian mustard are used to remove pollutants from contaminated soil and water? The correct answers were phytoremediation or phytotechnology or bioremediation. Question 7, pencil and paper, speedy spinning. A motor rotates an axle at 240 RPM. There is a 90-tooth gear attached to that motor, and it meshes with a 27-tooth gear. How many rotations will the 27-tooth gear go through in a minute?
Seconds. 800.
That is incorrect.
380.
That is incorrect.
Who was the first team that buzzed in?
800.
I need a unit with that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, if 800 is correct, with rotations or RPM. Yes. Do I prompt for units? Or is it considered incorrect?
They need to know that for any math question, they have to include the units, so it's incorrect.
Okay.
So do we want to do another math question?
Yes, do a different math question.
Okay.
No, that's fine. Make sure you include units, okay?
Okay, there are no math questions in my alternates, so I will go
Go to
round 5.
Round 5, number
Question 6. All right. Question 6, or round 5, question 6, our replacement question. Paper and pencil, calculating quickly. How many minutes are there in exactly 1 week?
Time. 10,800 minutes.
That is incorrect.
1,316 minutes.
That is incorrect.
10,080 minutes.
That is correct. All right, going back to round one. Question 8, park setting. The largest urban park in what U.S. city was the home of a hidden girl and her father in Peter Rock's 2009 novel, My Abandonment?
Central Park.
That is incorrect.
New York City.
That is incorrect.
Bronx Park.
That is incorrect. The largest urban park in what U.S. city was the home of a hidden girl and her father in Peter Rock's 2009 novel, My Abandonment?
Chicago.
That is incorrect. The correct answer is Portland, Oregon. Question 9, arts and crafts. What French term refers to an art form involving cutting out pictures, colored?
Collage.
That is incorrect.
Paper mache.
That is incorrect.
Embroidery.
That is incorrect. Paper or gold leaf, gluing them to an object and then coating the pictures and the object with layers of varnish. What French term refers to an art form involving cutting out pictures, colored paper, or gold leaf, gluing them to an object and then coating the pictures and the objects with layers of varnish?
Sculpting.
The correct answer is decoupage. Question 10, planetary dwarfs. As of 2024, there are 5 officially recognized dwarf planets. Pluto is one of them. Name any one of the other.
Ceres.
That is correct. Question 11, coordinated assaults. On the same day as the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces also attacked what British colony just off the coast of China?
Hong Kong.
That is correct. Question 12, paper and pencil. Radian conversions. Convert the following radian measurement to degrees. 7 pi over 12.
Ah,
105 degrees.
That is correct. Question 13. Do act mysterious. What female amateur sleuth, a counterpart to the Hardy Boys, made her first appearance?
Nancy Drew.
That is correct. Question 14. You don't want to catch this. Analysis of recovered Bronze Age skulls revealed lesions indicative of white death disease that typically infects the lungs and causes cough, fever, night sweats, and in the worst cases, death?
Tuberculosis?
That is correct. Question 15. Parts of speech. Dormir say, Levanter say.
Reflexive.
That is correct. That is the end of question 15. We'll take a moment to pause for substitutions. All right, we are going to continue. First of all, if any substitutions just entered, would you please state your name, grade, and school?
Hayden, 9th Fossil Ridge High School.
My name's Curtis. I'm a senior at Rocky Mountain High School.
All right. Oh, we have one more. I'm sorry.
My name's Misha. I'm a junior at Fossil.
All right, let's continue with question 16. Grammatical voice. Rephrase the following sentence so that it is in active voice. He was driven to the mall by his sister.
His sister drove him to the mall.
That is correct. Question 17. Entertainment. I Love Lucy, All in the Family, Cheers, and Seinfeld were all what genre of TV show?
Sitcoms?
That is correct. Question 18. Highest awards. The Fields Medal is awarded for
Mathematics?
That is incorrect. Accomplishments in mathematics and bears the image of what historic hero?
Newton.
That is incorrect. Who is said to have been killed by Roman soldiers when he refused?
Archimedes.
That is correct. Question 19. Important alkaline reactions. Slacked lime reacts with carbon dioxide to form limestone. What group 2 element serves as the cation in slacked lime?
Sodium?
That is incorrect. Slacked lime reacts with carbon dioxide to form limestone. What group 2 element serves as the cation in slacked lime?
Calcium.
That is correct. Question 20, memoir viewpoints. The Distance Between Us by Reina Grande offers a glimpse into the immigrant experience through the eyes of the children left behind in what country?
Germany.
That is incorrect. The Distance Between Us by Reina Grande offers a glimpse into the immigrant experience through the eyes of the children left behind in what?
Mexico?
That is correct. Question 21. Acronyms in the news. The following are all what type of organization? IBT, UAW, SAG-AFTRA, and NEA.
Unions.
That is correct. Question 22. Bordering bodies of water. The Kara Sea, the Laptev Sea, the Barents Sea, and the Caspian Sea all border which nation?
Russia.
That is correct. Question 23. The philosophy of science. Coined by Thomas Kuhn, what type of shifts initiated by theories such as Darwinian evolution or special relativity involves changes in understanding as a false scientific theory is superseded by a...
Pseudoscience.
That is incorrect. New one. Coined by Thomas Kuhn, what type of shifts initiated by theories such as Darwinian evolution?
Perspective?
That is incorrect. Or special relativity involve changes in understanding as a false scientific theory is superseded.
Replacement?
That is incorrect. By a new one.
A Kuhn shift?
That is incorrect. The correct answer is paradigm shifts. Question 24, paper and pencil. UFO. A rocket collides with a flying saucer 4 seconds after launch. If the altitude of the rocket in feet at t seconds after launch is modeled by the equation -16t squared plus 100t plus 6, what is the rocket's velocity when it collides with the flying saucer?
A 164 meters per second, or
Feet per second.
That is incorrect.
-28 feet per second.
That is correct. Question 25, paper and pencil. Wave behavior. When a wave encounters and reflects off a straight barrier, we are taught that the angle of incidence is equal to the angle of reflection. What line that is perpendicular
Angle of normacy.
That is incorrect. To the barrier are these angles measured from? When a wave encounters...
Intersection.
That is incorrect. And reflects off a straight barrier, we are taught that the angle of incidence is equal to the angle of reflection. What line that is perpendicular to the barrier are these angles measured from? The correct answer is a normal line or surface normal line. Question 26. Divvying up empires. Following the death of Genghis Khan, the Mongol Empire was divided into several territories ruled by his descendants. What is the term for these divisions?
Congate.
That is... Could you say that again? Sorry.
Congate.
That is correct. I'm going to refer to our judge on that one.
I'll go correct.
Okay. Con eights is... Okay. Question 27, science fiction. Shakespeare's The Tempest is the source for the title of what novel about a dystopian world marked by sleep learning, psychological conditioning, and drug-induced euphoria?
Brave New World.
That is correct. Question 28, murky measures. What term in environmental science describes the cloudiness of water, indicating
Turbidity.
that is correct. Question 29, ancient cities. The ancient city of Tenochtitlan is what modern city?
Mexico City.
That is correct. And question 30, everyday figurative language. Jake is in the parking lot when someone passes by and says, nice wheels. This stranger is employing what specific literary device where a part represents?
Schenectady.
That is correct. That is the end of round one. The scores are as followed: Fort Collins High School 63, Fossil Ridge High School 40, Rocky Mountain High School 42, and Timnath High School 40. Take a very short break for subs, and then we'll move on to round two. All right, let's move on to round two. Question one, paper and pencil. Solution dilution. Applying significant figure rules, how many millimeters of aqueous 2.00 molar magnesium sulfate solution must be diluted with water to prepare 100.0 milliliters of aqueous 0.400 molar mag? That is incorrect. Magnesium sulfate. Applying significant figure rules, how many milliliters of aqueous 2.00 molar magnesium sulfate solution must
12 milliliters.
That is incorrect. Be diluted with water to prepare 100.0 milliliters of aqueous 0.400 molar magnesium sulfate.
Fossil. 40 milliliters.
That is incorrect. That's read through twice.
20.0 milliliters.
That is correct. Question 2. Storytellers of the Sahel. What terms specifically used in regions like Mali and Senegal describe a West African historian, storyteller, praise singer, poet, and
Mansa?
that is incorrect. And musician who maintains a culture's oral tradition. What terms specifically used in regions like Mali and Senegal describe a West African historian, storyteller, praise singer, poet, and musician who maintains a culture's oral? That is incorrect. Poet, oral tradition. The correct answer was griot. Question 3, nomenclature. A scientific name, also known as binomial nomenclature, consists of two italicized words, one capitalized, the other not. What are the two parts known as?
Species and genus.
That is correct. Question 4, states of decay. Deindustrialization, economic decline, population loss, and urban decay in Midwestern regions that...
Rust Belt.
That is correct. Question 5, notable nautical novels. What is the name of Edgar Allan Poe's only full-length novel, a story of exploration and horror, published in 1838? What is the novel of Edgar Allan Poe's only full-length novel, was the name of Edgar Allan Poe's only full-length novel, story of exploration and horror, published in 1838?
Under the sea.
That is incorrect.
The Pit and the Pendulum.
That is incorrect. It's twice.
Timnith. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
That is incorrect.
The sea.
That is incorrect. The correct answer is The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. A classic. Question 6, paper and pencil. Parabolas. What is the vertex of the parabola with the equation y equals 4 times quantity x minus 2 end quantity squared minus 9?
2, -9.
That is correct. Question 7, naval ranks. The Arabic word amir, meaning commander, gave us the term...
Admiral?
That is correct. Question 8, middle ground. What group of elements, including boron, silicon, and germanium, has properties similar to elements at either end of the...
Metalloid?
That is correct. Question 9, current literature. What sport is central to Angeline Bully's 2021 novel, The Firekeeper's Daughter?
Cricket.
That is incorrect.
Tennis?
That is incorrect. What sport is central to Angeline Bully's 2021 novel, The Firekeeper's Daughter?
Soccer.
That is incorrect.
Lacrosse.
That is incorrect. The correct answer is hockey. Question 10. Cell phone shorthand. In the context of contacts application on a mobile phone, what do the letters ICE mean?
In case of emergency.
That is correct. Forgive me for this next one. Question 11. French rebuffs. Translate this dismissive sentence. Je ne veux pas te parler.
I don't want to speak to you.
That is correct. Question 12. Geology verbiage. A teacher holds a sample in their hand and says, "This is a mineral because it is an inorganic solid that possesses an ordinary crystalline structure and can be represented by a chemical formula." What important defining mineral characteristic did this teacher omit?
Compounded.
Incorrect. A teacher holds a sample in their hand and says, "This is a mineral because it is an inorganic solid that possesses an orderly crystalline structure and can be represented by a chemical formula." What important defining mineral characteristic did this teacher omit?
Non-living?
That is incorrect.
Homogeneous.
That is incorrect.
Naturally occurring.
That is correct. Question 13. Goofy holidays. The concept of an unbirthday was first introduced by whom in his 1871 novel Through the...
Lewis Carroll.
That is correct. Question 14. Asian colonies. A certain colony of France from 1887 to 1954.
Vietnam.
That is incorrect.
Upper Volga.
That is incorrect.
Cambodia.
That is incorrect. Included present-day Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam was named French what? A certain colony of France from 1887 to 1954 that included present-day Cambodia, Laos.
Polynesia.
That is incorrect. Correct answer was French Indochina. Question 15, fractional math. In lowest terms, express the solution to the following subtraction problem. 7/15 minus 2/5.
1/15.
That is correct. That is the end of question 15. We'll take a short break to sub out. Fort Collins has 70, Fossil Ridge has 40, Rocky Mountain 44, and Timnath Middle High 42.
I think it's a fight, but it's like Collins is competing against no one. It's truly a fight for the lowest spots.
Yeah. Why did it
We should do the numbers thing too.
We really didn't.
Okay, so remember, 1 means you know it, right, guys? 1 means you know it.
and 5 means you wait, what?
5 means we do not like.
That
it's
makes
the
no
least
sense
amount.
because
1 is number 1.
is I know nothing.
Wait,
Five
well,
is
5
I
is like the most confident. 5 should be the most confident. Like,
Okay, I guess so. We can do 5.
I have
We
5.
established it earlier, but I mean 5 works. 5 works.
Fine.
Well,
That made
Are we ready to continue? Any new subs would like to introduce themselves? All right, let us continue. Question 16. Ring around the relativity. Astronomers can observe massive celestial objects like galaxy clusters bending the path of light coming from more distant objects behind them. What is this phenomenon called?
Redshift.
That is incorrect.
Gravitational lensing?
That is correct. Question 17, quackery. A product harvested from certain reptiles in Chinese traditional medicine gives what name to fraudulent patent?
Snake oil.
That is correct. Question 18, keeping it in the family. French kings Louis XVI, Louis XVIII, and Charles X shared what familial relationship?
Cousins?
That is incorrect. French kings Louis XVI, Louis XVIII, and Charles X shared what familial relationship?
First cousins?
That is incorrect.
Brothers?
That is correct. Question 19, pencil and paper. Triangles. Expressed as a fraction in lowest terms, what is the cosine of the angle in a triangle that is opposite the side that measures 6 inches, given that the other two sides measure 3 and 7 inches?
Six sevenths?
That is incorrect. Expressed as a fraction in lowest terms,
One half.
that is incorrect.
Three sevenths.
That is incorrect. I'm in the middle of my second. What is the cosine of the angle in a triangle that is opposite the side that measures 6 inches, given that the other two sides measure 3 and 7 inches?
One twelfths.
That is incorrect. The correct answer is 11/21. 20. There are how many? A series consisting of 2 books is called a duology. A series consisting of 3 books is called a trilogy.
Quartology.
That is incorrect. Trilogy. What is a series of 4 books called?
A quadrology.
Could I ask her say that again?
A quadrilogy. A quadrilogy.
That is correct. Also tetralogy or quartet. Question 21. Forensic forerunners. Now fundamental in criminal investigations around the world, Henry Faulds pioneered the collection of what for the purpose?
Fingerprints?
That is correct. Question 22. Right outside the United States. Spain's Ministry of Equality sought to include the term irrenunciable in La Letran's legislation regarding LGBTQI+ rights. Used similarly in the U.S. Declaration of Independence, what does irrenunciable mean? Spain's Ministry of
Freedom of expression.
Incorrect.
Pursuit of happiness?
That is incorrect.
Unalienable?
That is correct. Question 23. Melodic mastery. Which Austrian composer, known for his beautiful melodies and Symphony No. 8 Unfinished, was a key figure?
Schubert.
That is correct. Can you read the rest of the question, please? I cannot, I'm sorry. Question 24, World of Alloys. Sterling silver is harder and more durable than pure silver. It is commonly alloyed with what other period?
Nickel?
That is incorrect. Commonly alloyed with other what period for transitional metal? Sterling silver is harder and more durable than pure silver. It is most commonly
Iron?
That is incorrect.
We're gonna pause there. We would accept nickel. Nickel is
My
the correct
apologies.
answer. Yeah. The other answer that was given, or that would be accepted, is copper. But both copper and nickel are sometimes combined to create those types of metals.
Okay. I believe. Right. Question 25, infamous incidents. What American civil rights activist was assassinated in Mississippi on June 12th, 1963 by
Martin Luther King Jr.?
That is incorrect.
Malcolm X.
That is incorrect.
Bobby Kennedy.
That is incorrect.
Rosa Parks.
That is incorrect. Correct answer was Medgar Evers. Question 26, pencil and paper. Surface solutions. What is the formula for the surface area of a sphere with a radius r?
4 pi r squared.
That is correct. Question 27, pencil and paper. A scheming bard. What is the rhyme scheme of a Shakespearean sonnet?
Iambic pentameter.
That is incorrect.
A, B, B, A?
That is incorrect. What is the rhyme scheme of a Shakespearean sonnet?
A B A B.
That is incorrect.
A, B, B, A, B.
That is incorrect. You're going to love this one. A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. Why is it raining? Question 28. Named after a highly respected Swedish meteorologist and dependent on supercooling and supersaturation phenomena, what process generates much of the precipitation that falls in the middle latitudes? What?
Hadley cells.
Incorrect.
The Coriolis effect?
Incorrect. Named after a highly respected Swedish meteorologist and dependent on supercooling and supersaturation phenomena, what process generates as much of the precipitation that falls in the middle latitudes?
Rain.
That is incorrect. The correct answer is the Bergeron process. Question 29, lonely spots. Despite lying 2,200 miles from the mainland, Easter Island, famous for its moai, is part of what south?
Chile.
That is correct. Question 30, anomalies. In Greek mythology, who was the Olympian god of blacksmithing and volcanoes?
Hephaestus.
That is correct. That is the end of round 2. We are going to take a 10 to 15 minute break. $6:20 will be our starting time. All right, we are going to pick up with round 3. First, do we have any new players to be introduced?
Daniel, Senior, RMHS.
From Rocky? Score updates going into round 3, Fort Collins 76, Fossil Ridge 42, Rocky Mountain 44, Timnath 45. Let's pick up with round 3. Question 1, team name origins. What NFL team claims the distinction of being the only one named for a poet or poem?
Dodgers.
Is incorrect.
The Baltimore Ravens.
That is correct. All right. Question 2. Ancient measurements. Eratosthenes calculated what Earth measurement by precisely observing the angle of the noonday sun.
Circumference of the Earth. Circumference of the Earth.
That is correct. Question 3. Mapping the world. What type of map uses contour lines to indicate relief?
Topographical map.
That is correct. Question 4. Starting strong. What part of speech is the first word in the sentence, when the bell rang, the students?
Adjective.
That is incorrect. The students rushed out. What part of speech is the first word in the sentence, when the bell rang, the students rushed out?
Subordinating clause.
That is incorrect. That is 2 times.
Adverb.
That is incorrect.
Noun.
That is incorrect. The correct answer is subordinating conjunction. Question 5, monarchs and medals. Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her Platinum Jubilee in 2022, celebrating how many years on the throne?
75.
That is incorrect.
60?
That is incorrect.
'71.
That is incorrect. Throne of the United Kingdom. Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her Platinum Jubilee in 2022, celebrating how many years on the throne of the United Kingdom?
80.
That is incorrect. The correct answer was 70. Question 6. Paper and pencil. How fast can it go? Using 3.0 times 10 to the 8th meters per second as the speed of light in a vacuum, calculate in meters per second the speed of light in liquid that has an index of refraction equal to 1.25. Using 3.0 times 10 to the 8th meters per second.
2.4 times 10 to the 8th meters per second.
That is correct. Question 7, Beethoven's Beginner Delight. What is the name of the beloved piano piece by Beethoven, also known as Baga?
For release.
That is correct. Question 8, seeing the whole thing. Derived from the Greek words for all and view, what is the word for a wide-angle representation of a physical space in photography?
Panorama.
That is correct. Question 9, ancient metaphysics. Aristotle's metaphysics, known as hylomorphism, Holds that each object is a compound of form and what else?
Structure.
That is incorrect.
Matter?
That is correct. Question 10, river systems. Based upon the dominant process operating within them, river systems can be divided into 3 zones. If sediment production and sediment deposition are the 2 of the zones, what is the name of the 3rd zone? Based upon the dominant processes operating within them, river systems can be divided into
Sediment equilibrium.
incorrect.
Sediment transportation.
That is correct. Question 11. Smells like a vocab question. What one word can fit both of the following clues? In Buddhism, the state of liberation from suffering.
Nirvana.
That's correct. I wanted to finish that question, but. Question 12. Getting it right. A book may contain a list detailing and correcting mistakes. What is the Latin name for this list?
Connotations.
That is incorrect.
Index.
That is incorrect. Detailing and correcting mistakes. A book may contain a list detailing and correcting mistakes. What is the Latin name for this list? The correct answer is errata. Question 13. You'll be back. In 1775, who issued a proclamation declaring elements?
King George III.
That is correct. Question 14. Historic storms. During the Great Solar Storm of 2024, plasma from the sun interacted with Earth's atmosphere to create the most extensive auroras in decades.
Solar flare.
That is incorrect.
Aurora.
That is incorrect. And decades. What term is used to describe the flow of plasma emitted from the sun?
Solar storm.
That is incorrect. During the Great Solar Storm of 2024, plasma from the sun interacted with Earth's atmosphere to create the most extensive auroras in decades. What term is used to describe the flow of plasma emitted from the sun?
Solar ray.
That is incorrect. The correct answer is solar wind. Question 15. Features and films. The San Gabriel and San Bernardino mountain ranges lie to the north and northeast of what second most?
Los Angeles.
That is correct. That is the end of question 15. We will take a short break for substitutions. All right, we are ready to continue. Question 16, paper and pencil. Rationalizing denominators. Express the number 1 over radical 8 in simplest terms.
Root 2 over 4.
That is correct. Question 17, vibrational patterns. With a standing wave, the locations that remain in the equilibrium positions are called what?
Nodes.
That is correct. Question 18, less common names. Because it was started by Vespasian and finished by his son Titus, what familiar landmark in Rome is formerly named the Flavian Amphitheater?
Colosseum.
That is correct. Question 19. Defiant education. In her autobiography, I Am Malala, Malala Yousafzai tells the story of her attempted assassination at the hands of what group?
The Taliban.
That is correct. Question 20. Bovine balance. Which trace mineral is crucial for the prevention of white muscle disease in calves and lambs and is commonly supplemented in livestock?
Calcium.
That is incorrect.
I'm going to have you do a different one because it's trace mineral.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm going to have you pick a different one just to make sure the pronunciation doesn't throw.
All right, I will go to alternate question 1.
Okay.
Solving atmospheric issues. In 1987, the Montreal Protocol was developed to eliminate the production and use of what?
Greenhouse gases.
Judge, I'm going to look to you on that one.
Okay.
That will be correct. All right, going back. Question 21. Liquid literacy. What chemistry term is used to describe what happens when the liquid's vapor pressure is equal to the atmospheric pressure?
Equilibrium.
That is incorrect.
Supercritical.
That is incorrect. What chemistry term is used to describe what happens within a liquid when the liquid's vapor pressure is equal to the atmospheric pressure?
Surface tension.
That is incorrect. That is twice.
Vapor equilibrium.
That is incorrect. Looking for boiling or vaporizing or vaporization. Question 22. Federalists versus Democratic Republicans. Name both founders, close friends in later life, who faced
Thomas Jefferson and James Madison.
That is incorrect.
Thomas Jefferson and John Adams.
That is correct. Question 23, paper and pencil. Percent grades. The railway line gains 484 vertical meters between point A and B and loses no altitude. If the horizontal distance is 4.4 kilometers, then what is the average percent grade over that distance?
11%.
That is correct. Question 24, Pacific Islanders. Home to approximately half of the country's population, what is the name of the capital and largest city of the Marshall Islands?
Maharo.
That is correct. Question 25, words of wisdom. The Hadith is a source of wisdom and guidance in which major religion?
Islam.
That is correct. Question 26, easy breezy. Derived from the name of the Greek god of the west wind, what word meaning?
Zephyrus.
That is incorrect.
Zephyr.
That is correct. Question 27, hacky sack. What Germanic tribe under the rule of King Alaric I began to pillage Rome in 410 CE?
The Vandals.
That is incorrect.
Goth.
That is incorrect.
The Saxons?
That is incorrect. The first time in almost 800 years the city had fallen to a foreign enemy. What Germanic tribe under the rule of King Alaric I began to pillage Rome in 410 CE? The first time in almost 800 years the city had fallen to a foreign enemy.
Barbarians.
That is incorrect. So I was looking for the Visigoths. Question 28. Okay, I will turn over to our social studies curriculum facilitator.
You answered Goth. There are several types of Goth tribes, and the specific year of 480, I believe,
410.
or 410 CE is the sack by the particular tribe of the Visigoths. I'm not answering anything other than the challenge.
All right, question 28. Important life processes. In what organelle of a plant cell does the photosynthesis take place?
Chloroplasts.
That is correct. Question 29. Paper and pencil. Raving for rat-eye. Assuming the spokes are one-dimensional, how many spokes would be on a six-wheeled vehicle if the angle between each adjacent pair of spokes is 45 degrees?
48.
That is correct. And question 30. Native American activism. In 1969, Native Americans seeking to draw attention to Native American rights and injustices occupied what former prison?
Alcatraz.
That is correct. That is the end of round 3. Fort Collins High School currently at 87, Fossil Ridge High School at 47, Rocky Mountain High School at 47, Timnath Middle High School at 50. We have one round to go. I think we are ready to begin the last round.
Okay. Guys are cooking through this. Good grief.
All right. Starting round 4, question 1, paper and pencil. Geographical math. Take the number of U.S. states at the outbreak of World War II, multiply by the number of official capitals of the state of South Africa, and multiply by the number of the meridian which passes through Greenwich, London.
Zero?
That is correct. Question 2. Pop music. Cher's 1998 album, Believe, popularized the use of what audio processor used to...
Auto-tune?
That is correct. Question 3. Going on and on. In computing, what type of loop continues to execute indefinitely?
A for loop.
That is incorrect.
While loop?
That is incorrect. Because its termination condition is never met. In computing, what type of loop continues to execute indefinitely because its termination condition is never met?
Infinite.
That is correct. Question 4. Banning bans. In the spring of 2024, the Federal Trade Commission banned what type of clauses in employment contracts that restrict former employees from switching to a rival company?
Non-compete clauses?
That is correct. Question 5. Red books and red blood. Between 1966 and 1971, according to one prominent scholar, between 1.1 and 1.6 million Chinese citizens were killed during what period of political upheaval?
Cultural Revolution?
That is correct. Question 6. Ice to the horizon. In contrast to valley glaciers, ice sheets exist on a much larger scale. Although many ice sheets have existed in Earth's past, just 2 achieved this status in 2024. Where are the 2 land masses on Earth you would need to go to see an ice sheet now?
Antarctica and South America?
That is incorrect.
Antarctica and Greenland.
That is correct. Question 7. Paper and pencil. Subseas. Place the following 4 Mediterranean seas in order from west to east: the Adriatic, Aegean, Balearic, and Tyrrhenian.
Balearic, Adriatic, Aegean, and Tyrrhenian.
That is incorrect. Place the following 4 Mediterranean seas in order from west to east: Adriatic, Aegean, Balearic, and Tyrrhenian.
Tyrrhenic, Balearian, Adriatic, Aegean.
That is incorrect.
Adriatic, Tyrrhenian, Balearic, Aegean.
That is incorrect. The correct answer is Balearic, Tyrrhenian, Adriatic, Aegean. Question 8. Laws of Motion. First published in 1876 by a U.S. Army officer, what eponymous book about parliamentary procedure is still widely referenced to govern voluntary organization? First published in 1876 by a U.S. Army officer, what eponymous book about parliamentary procedure is still widely referenced to govern voluntary organizations?
A Modest Proposal.
That's incorrect.
The Diplomacy of Another Nation.
That is incorrect. You all need to watch more school board meetings. It is Robert's Rules of Order. Question 9, logic. Consider the conditional statement. If somebody has hairy arms, then they do not drink soda. What is the inverse of this statement?
If somebody does not have hairy arms and they drink soda.
That is correct. Question 10, shadow play. One of Rembrandt's most famous group portraits is entitled Militia Company of District 2 under the command of Captain Franz Bannock Koch. What is the commonly known title for this work?
Portrait of Dorian Gray.
That is incorrect. One of Rembrandt's most famous group portraits is entitled Militia Company of District 2 under the command of Captain Franz Bannock Koch. What is the commonly known title for this work?
Crossing the River.
That is incorrect. Let's do twice.
The Battle of.
Sorry, that's incorrect. I think Rocky East.
I think we'll pass.
This is the Night Watch. Question 11, water. The chemical version of water which contains all deuterium isotopes is referred to by what?
Heavy water.
That is correct. Question 12, portmanteaus. What portmanteau describes a longer form television program that seeks only to promote a particular product and...
Infomercials.
That is correct. Question 13, correcting or corrupting. In 2023, what British author's work became the focus of controversy when his publisher suggested revisions of potentially offensive content, leading...
Dr. Seuss?
That is incorrect.
J.K. Rowling.
That is incorrect.
Roald Dahl.
That is correct. 14. Groups. Egyptologists traditionally group the pharaohs of ancient Egypt into 33 sets known as what?
Dynasties.
That's correct. Question 15. Moons on the move. What active geologic event has been observed on Saturn's moon Enceladus, Neptune's moon Triton, and Jupiter's moon Io?
Volcanic eruptions?
That is correct. We will pause there for any substitutions for our final 15. All right. Question 16. Pencil and paper. Air travel. 2 airplanes travel 1,750 miles. The first travels at 350 miles per hour, but must wait in a holding pattern for 30 minutes before landing. The second plane leaves an hour later, travels at 300 miles per hour, and lands without a holding pattern. In minutes, what will the time between landings be? 2 airplanes travel 1,750 miles. The first travels at 350 miles per hour, but must wait in a holding pattern for 30 minutes.
80 minutes.
That is correct. Question 17. Count them up. How often is the U.S. federal census conducted?
Every 10 years.
That is correct. Question 18. Powerful music. In the opera by Mozart, what type of instrument is given?
A flute.
That is correct. Question 19. Sweet structures. What kind of isomers are glucose and fructose, which have the same molecular formula but differ in the way their atoms are connected?
Isomers?
That is incorrect.
Structural.
That is correct. Question 20. War wounds. The Pulitzer Prize-winning novel The Sympathizer by Viet Thanh Nguyen tells the story of a double agent living in exile in the United States after the fall of what Vietnamese city?
Saigon?
That is correct. Question 21. Paper and pencil. Manipulating equations. Consider the equation 2x plus 5y equals 10. What is the value of the y-intercept of this equation?
Two.
That is correct. Question 22. Iberian history. What is the Spanish name of the centuries-long series of conflicts in which Christian kingdoms
The Crusades.
That is incorrect.
Conquistas?
That is incorrect.
Invasions.
That is incorrect.
The Reconquista.
That is correct. Question 23. Transformative thinking. What is the term for a transformation that slides a figure in the plane without rotating or reflecting it?
Translation.
That is correct. Question 24. Paper and pencil. Factorization. Two numbers multiplied together equal 1,000. Neither number is divisible by 10. What is the larger number?
$125.
That is correct. Question 25. Presidential passings. Presidential Ibrahim Raisi died with 7 others in a helicopter crash in May 2024.
Chile?
Incorrect.
Iran.
That is correct. Question 26. Records broken. Measuring about the size of a volleyball and weighing nearly 2 pounds, what type of weather-related object? Still a...
Hail?
That is correct. Question 27. Cameos. What Renaissance artist put his contemporaries, including Leonardo and Michelangelo, in a Vatican painting of the great thinkers?
Leonardo?
That is incorrect.
Raffaello.
That is correct. 28. Point of view. What 2010 novel by Sharon Draper is narrated by Melody, a student with cerebral palsy?
Out of My Mind.
That is correct. Question 29. The cost of peace. Notorious for its severe penalties and reparations imposed on Germany,
Treaty of Versailles.
that is correct. And question 30. Elemental stories. Knowing that symbols sometimes come from Latin names, the element whose Latin name is natrium has what English name?
Sodium?
That is correct. And that is the last question. Our final scores: Fort Collins High School 49, Fossil Ridge 94, Fossil Ridge 49, Rocky Mountain 58, Timnath 57. Thank you all for coming. We are going to pause for a second for photographs.
All right. Go ahead and move out. We're going to change this up so that we can actually do a small award ceremony and get some pictures.